Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, welcome everybody to today's presentation entitled Drawing Scales and Annotation inside of Carlson Software. My name is Ladd Nelson, the Midwest Sales Director for Carlson Software. And presenting today will be Jennifer DiBona of That CAD Girl, who will be going over some really wonderful content and how you can put Carlson Software to use for you. Apologize for the brief little delay in getting started here today, but without further ado, we'll turn the floor over to Jennifer. So go ahead and take it away, Jennifer.
Sounds great. Thank you, Ladd, and just want to extend my welcome as well for today's webinar, Drawing Scales and Annotation in Carlson. And just to take care of a little bit of housekeeping, we want to mention that Carlson's third annual Users Conference is coming up this November in Louisville, Kentucky. You can find out more at Carlson's website. Have a lot of classes over the 3 days, with that final day being dedicated to classes on point clouds and the CSI program. Also, for upcoming webinars, want to mention, I think this is next Thursday, we've got Paul Carlson, who is a Carlson dealer out of Texas. We'll have a Carlson Serve CE for GPS, and then the following Thursday he'll be talking about bringing DEM files into Carlson, and a DEM is a digital elevation model. So Paul's very good at what he does, so you'll want to make sure to check in on those. On the 20th, we're going to repeat the introduction to model space and paper space, since it didn't get recorded last time. And then on the 26th, we'll have tips and tricks for preparing drawings for surface model building in Carlson. And I'll be doing the paper space and tips and tricks. And then also, just to mention, these are 3 of the upcoming hands-on training that I have. These are 2-day classes. We're holding these in Raleigh, North Carolina. On August 16th and 17th, just another week or so away, is My Field to Finish. And with that class, you'll be able to learn about field to finish, but also we'll spend some time together online ahead of that class to make sure you bring everything you need, and during that 2-day class you will put together your field to finish code file and blocks and layers and everything else that's involved. The 23rd and 24th will be surface modeling with Carlson, and then on the 20th and 21st, along the same lines as My Field to Finish, I'll have a My Company Standards class, where again we'll spend time ahead of the class online and make sure you bring a good list of your standard layers, line types, text, just a list of what you're going to need. During that class you'll learn how to prepare it and create your standard files, as well as doing that. So you'll walk out with a standard. All right, so that out of the way, we're going to start off by talking about just standardizing annotation. And annotation we may think of as text, but in this way I mean text, I mean line type scales, dimension styles, and what your dimensions look like. So when we mention annotation today, we will take all of those into account. So one thing that you always want to do is to base your annotation standards on the plotted height or size. And what I mean by that is, instead of having a standard that says, well, on a 50 scale drawing I want my road names to all be 10 units high, or I want, on a 40 scale, it's going to be 8 inches high, or 8/10 of an inch high. Instead of doing that, we want to really develop something that's irrespective of scale. And now, why would you want to do that? Well, if you think about the drawings that go out of your office, our deliverables are still paper for the most part. So when you put a drawing out the door, don't you want, let's say, the line type for your contours, so existing contours, don't you want that line type to look the same regardless of which project, regardless of which drawing, regardless of scale? whether it's 100 scale or 50 scale, you'd like for that contour, the spacing and those dashes and gaps to look the same. Same thing, a boundary line. Don't you want all your boundary lines to look the same? Don't you want the text to show the same height on each sheet that goes out your door? And of course we do. So if you think about it and ask yourself those questions, you'll notice that for annotation, when you set things up, really the scale of the drawing, so that plot scale, is going to be the only thing that changes. So just to repeat, when you set up a set of annotation standards, you want to do it irrespective of scale and instead base that on the plotted height or size. So let's talk specifically about text, line types, and dimensions. So text sizes, what does that mean for us? Well, instead of using the examples that I did a second ago where it's scale-based, think of using something like I have here in the PowerPoint. Let your standard say, all road names shall be plotted to have a plotted text height of 0.2. So that means you're going to have to make some adjustments in your drawings, but that is a standard that applies to every sheet that leaves your office. Or the lot number for all proposed lots shall have a plotted height of 0.15. And then, of course, the blanket statement, unless otherwise specified, all text on drawing shall have a plotted height of 0.08. And I'm using those numbers. Most people probably in this audience will recognize a plotted height of 0.08. We call that an L80 size. A plotted height of 0.1 would be an L100, and so on. So we're just going to talk about the actual dimensions, so 0.08. This is a good way to set up your standard for text sizing. So next let's talk about that line type pattern. Okay, so when we say the line type pattern, we are talking about setting this up according to the plotted size of dashes, gaps, and characters or symbols in that line. Okay, so we're going to get a little deep into CAD when we talk about this, but we're going to dig down and actually look at the line type definitions that the CAD software actually uses. So this is a file called ICAD.lin. This is the actual file that IntelliCAD reads in, and this is the file that it uses to create all of these different line types. So for instance, this is our dashed line type. Okay, you can see that it's got, you know, the name of the line type, a little bit of a representation of that, and then some numbers underneath. Here is -2. You'll notice that any line type name with a 2 after it is going to be half the size of the normal. So -2 is going to have half the dimensions here. So let's look at those dimensions again, see what they mean. So looking specifically at the -2 line type, I've copied that in up here. Again, the top line just basically tells it the name of the line type. This is just, you just type in underscores and spaces just to give it a representation of what that line type will look like. But the important part are these three. The A, I can't honestly say I'm sure what that means, but it has to be there for all your line types. Then we have a comma, a 0.25, a comma, and then a -0.125. The 0.25 defines the length of dashes in the line type definition. The 0.125, notice that it's a negative, so this tells you how archaic this is. This goes back to the days of pen plotters. A minus told the pen plotter to pick up the pen. So a negative is a pen up and a positive is a pen down. So we have a pin down for a dash of a 0.25 distance, and then a pin up for a distance of 0.125 to show that gap. Now, we're going to check some things here, and one thing you will notice is that when I check this, I'm not going to check the very first dash, the very last dash, or the first or the last gap, because those end up adjusting. So if you're going to check this and try to get your spacing exactly right, because I know there's some of you out there that will want that, make sure to measure anywhere other than the first dash of the gap. Now, dimensioning, same thing. So I've got just a little diagram showing a box that's 4 units square. And when you set up a dimension style, you have the ability to really dig down into that dimension style and tell it how big, how long you want every piece of that dimension. So if you notice here, we can set, there is going to be a variable or a prompt where we can enter the text offset from dimension line. We can set that here. We can set, as you know, the leader or the text size. We can set this distance here, which is the extension line extension. So that is how long is this beyond the dimension line. We can set how far it offsets from the original point we picked to dimension. The text size. And if you have your text sitting above the dimension line, then that distance here is defined as the text offset from dimension line. So it's the same thing here. So again, very deep into looking at the details of dimension objects and of line type patterns. So there's a couple other things you may not think of immediately when you are trying to standardize your annotation, that if you are the one developing a CAD standard, that you may want to include. You may want to say and specify how far off of each line should my bearing and distance sit. So like that dimension object, we can make changes on how far your bearings and distances sit off of a line. The distance between contour labels. Those of you using Carlson know that in triangulate and contour, you have an option of adding labels as your contours are generated. You can set that up as an interval option. And so what you may say for that standard is that for every drawing that leaves our office, we want to see a contour label every 6 inches along that. So that is a way to set up a standard based on the plotted size, distance, height, whatever, instead of setting it up on a scale-based. Okay, so let's go into Carlson and really see what it means. So I have a drawing set up here, and let me just do a quick distance, and I'm working in Carlson 2010 with IntelliCAD. So I'll do a distance, and you see that this is just a 1 unit long line. So since we're probably mostly engineers and surveyors in the audience, we'll say this is 1 foot. This line is 1 foot long. And then the square is a 1 foot square. Before we get too far or really get into annotation too much, I think I need to back up just a smidge because there's a lot of confusion as I talk to people, even people who have used it for years, that get a little confused when we talk about text styles and text heights and how all of that works together. So I've been using AutoCAD a long time, so I'm used to typing. But for the first time I go through this, I will actually pull it off the menu bars. I'm not very good at this. But I want to look at text styles. So I'll go to the Draw menu, and then Text and Text Set Style. And I want to create a new text style. So I'll pick the New button. And I'm just going to call it Simplex. And the reason I'm calling this one Simplex is because I want it to have a font of Simplex. And we'll talk about this in a little more detail. But when you're working with Carlson, this is really a good method to use. Create a new style that's based on the font. Okay, so then I'll change the font to Simplex to match. And the important thing I want to point out is I have the fixed text height for the Simplex style set at 0. Okay, doesn't sound real logical, but let's see what we get and what that means when we have a fixed text height. In other words, our default text height for this style set to 0. So I'll go to Draw, Text, and Standard, and I'm just going to put in, I went right on by it. My first prompt, which is the important thing, was to start point. My next prompt was the height of the text, and that's the key, is that it's even prompting me for the height of the text. Now, it's set at a default of 0.08. We'll see where that came from in a minute. But the important thing that I want you to get out of this is that it asked it all. So it asked me what the height of the text was, and I had an opportunity to change it if I wanted, which I don't. I'll pick E for my angle, and then type in a line of text. Now let's see what the change is. If I actually list that, you'll see it does have a height of 0.08. And now let's go back and set the style, and let's just change it here and see what difference this makes. So it doesn't matter what that height is. If it's anything other than 0, you're going to see that Create Text command act a little differently. So now when I go to Draw, Text, and Standard Text, I'll pick the starting point. And notice it skipped right past. If we have that height set in the text style dialog box, it doesn't even ask us for the height. It goes right to rotation angle. And you can tell it's the same height as the one before it. So that's the difference. If you set up a text style with a height of 0, it will not prompt you for the text height. If you force a text height, it will just assume you want that height. Now, I'm actually going to type style because that's a quicker way for me to get back to that dialog box. I actually want to leave this at 0 because this works better with Carlson. So when you set up your text styles, set them up with a 0 height, and again we'll talk in more detail, and I'll pick OK, and I can actually just erase those. So, excuse me. So now I've got this line, and we can see that it shows up in a dashed line type, and we can see here it's actually dashed 2. So let's look at more details. Where else is it finding out information about that line type? Under Settings, Drawing Setup, this is the whole key here. So what we want to get to is a place where from drawing to drawing, from project to project, the only thing we want to change or have to change is that horizontal scale value. Notice that the text plot size is set up at 0.08. This is the plotted text size. Carlson takes the plotted text size that you specify here, multiplies it by the horizontal scale, and it tells you here actually how tall that text will be in your drawing. Same thing here with Linetype scaler. We've got that set to 1. The Linetype scaler gets multiplied by the horizontal scale, and it sets the CAD setting of LT scale. The LT scale gets multiplied by these values in order to create that pattern that is relative to the scale of your drawing. So let's just look at this here. So notice I've got one set. If I type a 50 and just hit my Enter key, you can see that as soon as I did that, this hasn't changed, but it's multiplied 0.08 times 50, and now text that would be added to my drawing would be 4. It's taken that 1 for the Linetype scaler, multiplied it times 50, and determined an LT scale of 50. So all line types defined in IntelliCAD would be multiplied times 50. So we have a very short line here. So we're going to leave this at 1. And I'll pick OK. And now this is nothing different. I'm going to type DT to start text, which is, again, the faster way for me. It prompts me because my default text type for the text style is set to 0.08 rotation angle, and I can just say this text is high, or something like that. Easy enough. Let's look at. I'm going to try to do these in order and hit the text. Next, we're ready to look at the line type. So this is still only a single line, so it has 2 endpoints. It's not like I can snap to see how long that dash is. But I can do a distance command and just roughly hit that point, roughly hit that, and had I been a better aim, you would see that that's exactly 0.25 feet in our case long, so it's 1/4 foot. And then same way with that gap from here to here. 0.125 is what it would be if I'd snapped better. Let's look at the dimension. So I'll use my dimensioning toolbar here to create a linear dimension. And we can see that it dimensioned. It doesn't look too bad, but there are a few things I'd like to look at, and let's check. One thing, I know that I want to get rid of a couple decimal places. A second one, I never like having that extension line sticking that far beyond my dimension line. So let's actually do a distance on that, and I'll just snap to the endpoint right here, and snap to the endpoint right here, and we'll see 0.18, and we'll see that value again in a second. And then I'll show you one more because a lot of people like to kind of play around with this one as well, is the dimension setting for offset from origin. And this is actually set to a distance of 0.0625. Now to get into my dimension style manager, again, old time typing is DDIM. And one thing in at least this version of IntelliCAD, ignore this. It's not representative at all. But the first thing I want to look at is under the Units tab is the scaling setting. So the comprehensive scale factor is 1. We'll see this in a bit, but you will, but that value is taken, and it's the same as my horizontal scale set from Carlson's drawing setup. So I can see here that I can change decimal places. Let's see, I also wanted to look under lines, and again, it's too bad this little preview doesn't work better. But the two things I wanted to look at from here are the offset from origin. So if you remember, that's that distance right here, 0.0625, which is exactly what, actually it's still on my command line. And then the other one was extend the line, so the extension lines past the dimensions by 0.18, so that's that distance. And I'm going to set that up to be, let's just do 0.1. And I'll pick OK, and you'll notice that nothing actually updates. When you make a change to the Dimension Style Manager in this version of IntelliCAD, at least, it doesn't update automatically. So Carlson, or I guess IntelliCAD, has this button for Apply Style. Now that I've made changes to that style, I can just select on that dimension, and you can see those changes have been applied. Okay, so again, this is kind of the value that you end up getting from setting this up based on a plotted height. So this is scale of 1 to 1. If I zoom out, you can see somewhere that I actually have a bigger one. And so we'll focus on this one. If I do a check the distance, snap endpoint to endpoint, can see that this line is 50 units long, 50 feet long, and the box beside it is 50 feet square. And it looks like they're continuous line types. Okay, so if I go to put text in, I'm going to type dtext, pick my starting point here. It's defaulting again. It prompts me, but it's defaulting to 0.08. I'll just accept that. Let's see what we get. And if I type in this text is also 0.0. So now we're looking at a 50-foot long line and a piece of text that is 0.08 high. If I zoom in to look at that, you'll even see that the lines have a line type pattern. If I select it, it's -2. If I zoom in and check the length of that dash, it's still 0.25. And it's still 0.125. So we are now getting into talking about scale factors. So as you can see here, most of the line work, when we're talking about a boundary or what have you, is going to be long enough that a text height of 0.08 is not going to make it. It's not going to even show up. So we need to apply scale factors to all of our annotation, including text, line types, and dimensions. So again, with our aim to be, the only thing we have to make a change is to change the horizontal scale here, and Carlson does the rest. So again, our text plot size still 0.08, but now, again, it's going to multiply 0.08 times 50 and create text at a 4. Our line type scaler remains at 1, from drawing to drawing to drawing, times 50 gets the LT scale for this drawing. So now if I go to put text in again, notice my default text height now. So now you see where it's reading that default text height. This is the reason we have to create our default text styles with a height of 0. That's to give Carlson this ability to apply the scaling factors for plotting. So text height is 4, so this text is 4 high because it's a 50 scale. So I will add my dimension here, and we're going to see everything here correct as well. So we've got an issue. Notice that, and I should have done that. I should have put a dimension in there before I changed the text height or changed the horizontal scale. Same exact thing. Had I put a dimension in before changing the horizontal scale, it would not update automatically. So again, I would have to rely on this Apply Style button. But if we go in and let's look at the text here, it's 4 units high. That offset, I'm going to have to do some math here, so that offset here is 3.125. Is that right? So what do we have? We had 50 scale now times 0.0625, 3.125. It's exactly as it should. All it's done is taken those dimension settings and multiplied them out. So this is the one I should have checked because I think I made it a nice even number. Yeah, 0.1 is what I set that to earlier, multiplied by our 50 scale, and we have 5. So why is that one working? Let's look back at our dimension scales style. Back under units, look what's happened. That comprehensive scale factor was automatically pushed over from the horizontal scale set in the drawing setup. But we still have this text. So we've figured out how to update our line work, our line types. They do it automatically pretty much. But we still have this text that we put in before we made that scale change. How do we fix it? Well, a couple ways, none of them real good. But if I select it and right-click, I know what the right height should be, so I could just manually go here and change it. Not a great option. Carlson does give you, under Settings, an option for Rescale Drawing, and I would just have you use this with a little bit of caution. It prompts old horizontal scale is 1, the new is 50, and then select entities. Notice what it's going to scale: text, symbols, dimensions, and blocks. It will do all of those entities around or by their own insertion point. So if I select this, it scales that text up, so it's also 4 units high. So you can see that here. Okay. Now let's talk just a little bit more about line types. Notice how on this square, got a nice, pretty evenly generated line type, but I'm going to make a copy of that and scoot it over. And this is a polyline, so you can see it's one piece. And let's look at what happens if I right-click and go to Properties. There is a setting for polylines called Continuous Line Type. So it was off on the original. I'm going to turn it on here. And notice that that line type has shifted. So I've not done anything. The line's not longer, but that pattern has shifted along. Why? Well, by default, when it applies a line type pattern, IntelliCAD wants to start every line segment with a dash, with a full-size dash. And it wants a full-size gap. What it wants to ensure is that at a vertex of a polyline that you do not have a gap, that there's actually a line segment there. It's important for a line, right? So if I just have a single line segment here, and that had a dashed line type, it'd be very important for me to make sure I could find that endpoint. That's why it starts and ends all line segments with a dash and not a gap. Well, when we turn on that polyline line type generation, it skews it. So it lets it evenly distribute that line type from the start to the end of the polyline. And you'll see this if I grip this, and I'm dragging this up, so the polyline's getting longer. And notice where that vertex is now. So that's what you get from a line type generation along a polyline. There is a setting that you can set in your drawing, and maybe even in your drawing template, called P-Line Gen. And if that is turned on in your drawing, then all new polylines will be drawn with that line type generation turned on automatically. This is why, if you've ever noticed on contours, especially contours with a lot of little vertices along that polyline, if the line type generation is turned off, that line type doesn't show up very well. So now let's talk about how this gets into paper space and how all this applies. So I'm going to switch over to my Layout tab, and I was in the middle of a command, so switched. Yep, got that. So I need a title block. So I'm going to go to Settings, and I'm going to insert a title block. And I will do 24 by 36 and pick OK. And just pick a point here. No. And if I do a distance on it, I just saw something there I want to double check. So, all right, it did it wrong for me. All right, so I actually want that title block at a 1-to-1. I thought so. And I'll pick OK, pick here. There we go. So when we draw in paper space, we want that title block to actually be the plotted units, so 24 inches by 36 units. So see that. And now if I do, all right, I'm going to double check one more thing, make sure. All right, leave this back to 50. All right, that didn't happen in my prep, so I'm not quite sure what happened there. But what I'm going to do is create a viewport. So I'll type in MV. And just give myself a little window. It's not too big. And let's zoom in. Get this little guy framed out. And then I need to set the scale inside this viewport. So I do that. I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way of typing Z 1/50 XP. And now I have set the scale of the drawing inside that viewport at a 50 scale. And when you do that, and I just did a regen, this is really the way it's going to show up to you. I think I've just got something funky with my scale right now. But it's going to show up, and notice that you don't have any line types that are shown. But let's check the other things. Let's look at the text. So again, I'm in Paperspace, so I just need to kind of click to find that. 0.08. Okay, our text here is 0.08. So what's going on with Paperspace? So what we do in Model Space is we scale that text up by 50 times so that it's relative in size to the line that we're dimensioning. But then when we go to Paperspace, we have to scale it back down 1/50 so it'll fit on a page. And so that's how, when we establish our standard based on a 0.08 plotted text, everything works and everything comes together in the end. We still have an issue with our line type, though. And this is something I've noticed. It's a default setting, again, in IntelliCAD. But I'm going to type in PSLT scale. This is a Paperspace line type scale. It's different than a normal LT scale in that it's just got a setting on or off. And what we want to have it do is turn that off, and then I'll do a regen all, and now this is the way it should be. And if we check our sizes of those line type dashes, we're back to 0.25 and 0.125. What PSLT scale does, just kind of very briefly, is if PSLT scale is turned on, it is only looking at, if I get this right, it ignores the model space LT scale, and it only looks at what's in Paperspace and the scale of that viewport. So it only looks and shrinks everything 1/50. However, if we have PSLT scale turned off, then it looks at our LT scale, which is 50 in model space, and then it looks at the viewport scale, which is 1/50. So everything comes out to a scale of 1:1 when we plot. So hopefully that made sense to most people out there. Let's get on to a little bit more specifics about Carlson and Carlson's design. So hints for setting up and using the annotation tools in Carlson. Text styles. We've already said this many times. Only create a new text style if you have a different font or decoration. And for instance, a decoration I would call, I don't know, maybe, I don't think you can do underline there, but oblique. So if you want to italicize it and have it leaning over 15 degrees to the right, you may have a simplex font, and then you may have a simplex O for simplex oblique to where it leans to the right. Also, for Carlson's purposes, any text styles that you're going to use for annotation in Carlson, you want to have that default text height set to 0. Okay. Next item, use the scalar or plot size settings where available, and then save those to settings files. So we'll talk a little bit about that again. But I will tell you, I use scalar in quotes and plot size in quotes. That's one thing you're going to find. Those prompts, they'll say something different in just about every dialog box. So I'll point that out, and then save it to settings files. And then just kind of stand back and let the horizontal scale do the rest. So you set this up one time, save it to settings, pass it around your office, everybody loads it in. Then the next drawing, if the scale changes, all you have to do is change the scale. So let's look at that. So I'll open up a different drawing. And for this one, again, let's just start off with looking at the two important things. One, text styles and sizes, and the horizontal scale setting. So I'm going to type in my style command again, and I'll create another new one, and I'll call it Simplex. Font is already set for me, 0 text height, and I'll pick OK. The next thing that's going to affect me is the horizontal scale. So I go here, I'm set to 50, which is exactly where I want to be. My text plot size is going to set it up. It's going to multiply 0.08 times 50 and give me text height of 4. And for the rest of this, we're really talking about text and text only. So I'm not really even going to get in and mention line types and dimensions again. Now, under Annotate, I'm going to go to Annotate Defaults. Under the General tab, it's reading that horizontal scale from our drawing setup, so I don't have to change it. Text Size Scaler. Remember how I said it calls it something different everywhere? It was text plot size in drawing setup. It's text size scaler here. It's the same thing, 0.08. The bearings and distances that I put on here, I want to have a plotted text height of 0.08. Text offset scaler, this is one we haven't really mentioned, 0.06. That means how far is the text going to be placed off the line. Okay. Under angle, I can set the angle layer, and here the angle text style is already actually set to simplex. That's right where I want it to be. And distance is set to simplex as well. Now to label that, all I have to do is auto annotate. Not going to make a change here, and then I'm just going to select these two, and we see that these have been placed. If I check the height, again I'm at 50 scale, so this should be height of 4, which it is. And if I check that distance off, should have made that something easier to do the math. 50 scale times 0.06 should be 3, which is exactly what it is. Now let's say we want to make a change and have the text sitting a little further off that line. I'm going to go back, and you can actually get to Annotate Defaults two ways. I'm going to go to directly into Auto Annotate and pick the General Settings button here. And this actually takes me back to Annotate Defaults. Same thing, just a different way to get there. So that text offset scaler, I want to actually increase that, and let's go to 0.1. Be easier to do the math. Pick OK, and now I'm still in Auto Annotate, and I had the setting, I should have pointed it out, so that when I annotate a line, if it has already been annotated, it's going to erase the previous. And you can see that that is now sitting a lot further off the line than it was originally. And if I check, it should be 5. If I could pick better, it would be 5. So we've got our bearings and distances set up. We've got that format. We've got the settings set exactly how we want, we think. Now we have 2 more lines, and we're pretending we're in a different drawing here or something, but let's just change the scale. So if I go back to 200, change this to 200, hit Tab, I can see my text size go up based on that text plot size in the horizontal scale. My LT scale is not set right here. Back to Annotate, Auto Annotate. OK to that, and I can pick these. And when I do it, I can see I've got a problem when I have 2 lines that are close together. So maybe that 0.1 as an offset wasn't such a hot thing. Again, it's just that easy. I just go back. I can get to Annotate Defaults, which I should have gone the other way. Maybe I need to go back to 0.06. Auto Annotate again. And I can kind of straighten those up. Now if the scale here has changed and I would want to re-annotate these, I could pick them again. But this is actually a good opportunity. I hadn't planned to do this, but if I use rescale drawing, I kind of want you to see the problem that happens. Is old horizontal scale was 50, and then I'll try that again, 50, and the new is 200. And if I select those, notice that when I do it, when you do that rescale, it holds the insertion point, so it did not keep that distance off the line. So that's one of the problems with doing that rescale. If I wanted to actually work properly, I would have to do each one of them at a time. Actually, even that wouldn't work, I don't think. So 50, 200. Yeah, actually, so I don't think it kept. It's not going to increase that. So let's look at one other type now, and let's look at this. Generally the same, and now I have a little subdivided lots, and I want to put my lot labels inside. So again, my two things are going to be to check for my text styles. In this case, I actually want to have two different text styles. I want my lot number to be in an Arial font, and I want my acres and square footage to be labeled with a simplex. So I'm going to have to create two text styles. Again, working with Carlson, font and that decoration are the only thing you really have to pay attention to. So I'll do an Arial. And find this. Again, default fixed text height is 0. I'll pick Apply. And then New to create my simplex. Change the font for this one. Again, fixed height is 0. I'll pick Apply, OK. And now, next I want to pick the drawing setup. Again, have everything set at a 50 scale. That's all good. Pick OK. And now under Area Layout, I'm going to look at Area Defaults. And you can see my fields, so my lot description. If I double-click on that, I can set the text style just for that piece of text. That one needs to be set to Arial. And then the text size. Again, based on, let's say, my company standard, I know that the lot numbers for every lot needs to be 0.15 when it's plotted, 0.15 of an inch when it's plotted. And pick OK. For square feet, I need to select a style. I'll pick my simplex style. And the text size, standard in my office, is probably going to be a 0.08. For an L80, and check this one, I've got to fix it as well. Now, if we just kind of quickly remember, what are we supposed to do? Use those scalar plot size settings where available, and then save to the settings file. So that means making good use of the save and the load buttons. And you can just call this, you know, bearing and distance standard. And from that point on, anyone else getting into a new drawing, a new installation of Carlson, whatever, can load that, and they're going to get all these same settings that we have. And then from here, I'm just going to do an area by interior point. Pick a point inside. Oh, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. There we go. And if we zoom down in, you can see, if I list that, that's my 0.08 of a plotted height times 50 for my scale, and I get a text height of 4. So just to mention, again, I didn't hit it when I was here, under Annotate Defaults, notice that you have Load and Save buttons here. And not that it really applies to what we did, but when you create certain annotations, so if you have, you know, if you want to see your bearings and distance on that side, you can do a load and a save for those and set those settings. So pretty much in most of Carlson's annotation setup, you're going to see those load and save buttons. And then if you go through and make a whole bunch of settings changes, each of those dialog boxes have their own Save Settings button. But then under Carlson Configure, say you've been working for days and you have them all set up, under Carlson Configure, there's a Save As, which actually saves every setting across the Carlson program into one CFG file that can be loaded then for everybody else. So that's the way to get your standard to be standard and pass it out to everybody else. So with that, lad, I think I've about wrapped it up. I'll just hit this one more time. Again, the webinar's coming up. And these are on Carlson's website. You can go and sign up for those. And then the classes that I have. So I guess now I'm ready for questions, if you have any.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. We're a very good presentation today. Actually, we've had a number of questions. I think you've addressed most of them. A few of them related to the PSLT scale variable and how that impacts the overall plot. One of the questions I did want to defer to you was two questions that came in related to independent scaling of viewports, and how if you've got two viewports, one with one scale and one with another, is it possible to have the text size plot out?
I knew that was going to come in. I knew that was going to come in. Yeah, actually, I found a bug this morning.
Uh-oh.
That was going to be part of it. I found a bug, and let's see. Let's go here. So I found a bug in IntelliCAD. So I have not had time to report it. So let me close out, and I will open back up. I am prepared for it, so that's a good thing. And then I'll go back into IntelliCAD and kind of show you what ends up happening. But should have had this open and going. Did you have another question while this is loading?
There was that one, and then there was a question related to, yeah, basically just showing, let me find it here real quick. It was related to, okay, can we be shown how to set the text size property in Carlson Survey 2010 with the embedded AutoCAD, in particular the text size settings? And I didn't know if you actually had the Survey OEM product installed.
I don't. No, I don't. Is it? I didn't think it was different, though.
No, it shouldn't be. Just the CAD engine part of it would probably be about the only real difference.
Okay. All right, so I've got this open now, so it's the same drawing we were working at before. So let's switch over.
I don't see your application here.
Oops, I had paused it. How's that?
Okay.
All right, so I have now launched, I'm in AutoCAD 2008, switched back over. So this is the same drawing. I just opened the same drawing that we had in IntelliCAD. And if I zoom out, you'll see that I even have a third one. So this one is meant to be at a 500 scale. So if I change this to 500, and do a regen, again the same thing happens. And you know, now if I do a distance, I'm going to check this. So it's now 500 times 0.25, which ends up with a roughly, or it should be exactly a 125. But whoever asked the question is exactly right. When you make this change in model space, it affects everything in the drawing. So that 500 LT scale is now applying to everything. So if you have multiple scales to be plotted, and again, this is going to affect line types only. If you have multiple scale drawings to be plotted from the same DWG file, unfortunately, unless you're using annotative text in the newer versions of AutoCAD, it's really a matter of putting two different sets of dimensions, two different sets of text is how you would have to handle the text and the dimensions. However, line types, what we can do is go back, and now I'm going to make another viewport. And make sure I make it big enough. Zoom. This is my 500 scale. 500 XP. And so what you can tell is, again, now that I'm in paper space, if I check that distance, this should be a 0.25, and it is. So the LT scale is working, the PSLT scale is turned off. We can see the correct line type scaling here, we can't here. Here's how you have to do it. Remember that I said PSLT scale, when it's turned on, it ignores, well, that's not exactly right then. I said that it ignored the model space. I'm not quite sure which one it's looking at, but I'll tell you how it works. I just confused myself, so it tells you how easy it is. What you have to do is go to Model, and this is something you would set only when plotting in order to get this to work correctly. When plotting, set your LT scale in model space to 1. So in model space, you're not going to see the correct line type scales. Come back over to paper space, and that PSLT scale needs to go back on. There we go. So here I have a 1 to 50 viewport. Here I have a 1 to 500 viewport. And let's show that. Let me actually add one other thing that will show that well. Draw a bar scale, add a 50 scale, and now draw it at 500. So we can actually tell that this is correct, because if I measure that bar scale, it's 1, which is exactly as it should be. And if I measure this viewport that's been scaled down by 500 times, that measures to 1, which it should be. But notice with our line types, in the 500 scale viewport, 0.25, and in the 50 scale viewport, 0.25. So when you plot, turn that LT scale in model space to a 1. That keeps it from interfering, however it does. And then your PSLT scale would go to 1 in that case. And that way, that much I do know, is that when PSLT scale is turned to 1, and actually that's a little difference, IntelliCAD says on or off, AutoCAD says 1 for on, 0 for off, same thing. So PSLT scale turned on or set to 1 means that line types are paying attention only to the viewport scale and nothing else.
Okay, we have just a few other, questions and comments. There was one just to mention a little bit about the MV lock command, just to be able to lock down a viewport and prevent changes to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't get into the details of. Actually, let's go back over to IntelliCAD. And actually, what IntelliCAD doesn't do is it doesn't with PSLT scaled to 1. It doesn't work right. So that's why I stayed over. But just switching back. I know a lot of people are using IntelliCAD, so. Yeah, so that viewport in IntelliCAD, if I go to Properties, you can lock the viewport, and that keeps you from messing up your scale. So, and for anybody that's interested, I did the webinar a few weeks ago on Paperspace. We just didn't get it recorded, and that's what I'm going to be redoing again in a couple of weeks. So we'll hit that in detail. Okay.
Well, as of right now, then, that just about takes care of all the questions that we had. So with that, it's shortly after 1 o'clock Eastern Time right now, so we will plan on wrapping up the session. Any other parting information, Jennifer, you'd like to convey?
No, not really. Just as always, Just get to my information here. That's my email address. Feel free, if anybody has follow-ups, feel free to get in touch with me, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Actually, we're not seeing it on the screen there, but yeah. So if you can just check the Carlson website or look for Jennifer's.
Try one more time.
Yeah.
All right. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
So thank you for your time and presentation today, Jennifer. And again, today's session is being recorded and will be posted to the Carlson movie page hopefully later today or hopefully tomorrow, one of those two. And we encourage you to download it and look at it. And again, feel free to visit our website for additional webinars coming up between Paul Carlson and Jennifer here later throughout the month. And thank you, everybody, for your time. That concludes today's session.
Thank you, everyone.